Britain in the 1950s was a proud nation, quietly rebuilding itself from the ashes of war, and nowhere was that ambition more visible than in its motor industry. Manufacturers were dreaming bigger than ever, promising the public cars that would define a generation. But behind the showroom glamour and the breathless press releases, something darker was brewing. Engineering disasters, styling catastrophes, commercial humiliations that would haunt boardrooms for decades. Today, on UK Car Vault, we are counting down 10 of the worst British cars from that turbulent decade. And by the time we reach number 1, your jaw will be firmly on the floor. Let's begin.
At number 10, we open the countdown with a car that had the misfortune of being deeply, painfully average. The Standard Pennant. Produced by the Standard Motor Company in Coventry, launched in 1957. Standard decided to take their existing 10 model, already a modest and unremarkable small car, and dress it up slightly. Two-tone paint, a bit of chrome trim, some minor cosmetic changes. The idea was to create a more upmarket feel without spending money on actual engineering improvements. The result was exactly what you would expect. Underneath the two-tone paint and the decorative chrome, it was still the same small, underpowered car it had always been. The 948cc engine produced performance that could generously be described as adequate. The interior was sparse. The ride was firm in all the wrong ways. Buyers who expected something meaningfully better than the basic 10 felt misled. The Pennant sold in modest numbers, generated no excitement, and was discontinued in 1960. It wasn't a catastrophe, but it was the perfect opening act for a countdown of cars that promised more than they delivered.
At number 9, Morris was one of Britain's most trusted names, which made the Oxford Series 2 a particularly puzzling disappointment. Launched in 1954, the Oxford Series 2 was a family saloon that looked like it had been styled by someone actively avoiding any form of creative risk. The body was upright and slab-sided, the proportions were awkward. While other manufacturers were beginning to move toward lower, wider, more modern shapes, the Oxford Series 2 looked like it belonged firmly in the previous decade. The engine, a 1489cc four-cylinder unit, was competent enough. Reliability was reasonable, but reasonable reliability cannot compensate for styling that made even contemporary journalists reach for words like dated and uninspired. In a decade where buyers were becoming more style-conscious, more aware of what cars could look like, the Oxford Series 2 offered them nothing to get excited about. Morris could do better. Morris had done better, and that made this particular model all the more difficult to defend.
At number 8, the Austin A30 arrived in 1951 as Britain's answer to the small family car, and on the surface, it seemed reasonable enough. Small, affordable, economical, exactly what post-war Britain needed. But the A30 had a fundamental problem that no amount of goodwill could solve. It was too small and too underpowered for the demands placed on it. The 803cc engine struggled, not just on hills, although hills were a genuine challenge, but in normal daily driving. Carrying a full family load, the A30 felt breathless and strained. The body, while compact and neatly styled, flexed more than it should. Wind noise at speed, such speed as the A30 could achieve, was significant. Owners found themselves nursing the car rather than driving it, treating it gently, avoiding certain roads, planning routes around gradients. A car that requires its driver to compensate for its limitations is not a good car. The A30 required considerable compensation. It was updated into the A35 in 1956, which was meaningfully better, but the original A30 spent 5 years on sale reminding buyers of everything it couldn't quite manage.
At number 7, the Hillman Minx had been a fixture of British roads since the 1930s. By the time the Phase 6 arrived in the early 1950s, it was carrying the weight of a very long history. And it showed. The Phase 6 Minx was a conservative car in an era that was beginning to demand something more. The styling was cautious. The engineering was familiar to the point of being tired. The Roots group seemed determined to change as little as possible and hoped that the Minx name alone would carry sales. For a while, it did. The Minx had loyal buyers who trusted the nameplate and didn't ask too many difficult questions. But the motoring press was less forgiving. Reviews noted the outdated feel, the lack of development, the sense that Roots was coasting on reputation rather than investing in progress. The Phase 6 Minx was not a disaster in isolation, but as a symbol of a company standing still while the world moved forward, it earned its place on this list.
At number 6, Daimler was a name associated with the very highest levels of British prestige, royalty, diplomats, the establishment, which made the Conquest century of 1954 a genuinely surprising disappointment. The Conquest century was positioned as a sporting Daimler, a more performance-oriented car for buyers who wanted the Daimler name, but also wanted some excitement. The problem was that Daimler's engineering at this point was showing its age. The pre-selector gearbox, a Daimler trademark, felt archaic compared to what rivals were offering. The performance, despite the sporting pretensions, was unimpressive. And then there was the handling. Daimler had prioritized comfort for so long that asking one of their cars to behave sportingly produced results that were, at best, unconvincing. Buyers who expected a genuine sporting saloon felt the Conquest Century fell some distance short of that promise. For a company of Daimler's standing, producing a car that couldn't justify its own positioning was an uncomfortable moment. At number 5, the Ford Popular 103E holds a particular kind of record. When it launched in 1953, it was already out of date. Ford had taken their aging Anglia design, itself derived from pre-war thinking, stripped it back to its most basic form, and sold it as the cheapest car on the British market. The aim was simple: give Britain an affordable car, the cheapest possible car. And in that narrow ambition, it succeeded. But the Popular 103E had a side-valve engine that was genuinely antiquated. 3 gears, no heating as standard, minimal instrumentation, a driving experience that felt like a lesson in how cars used to be, rather than how they should be. Contemporary road tests were kind, because the price was genuinely remarkable. But kindness to the price cannot disguise the fact that Ford was selling a pre-war design to a post-war public and calling it progress. The Popular 103E remained in production until 1959. By the end, it was embarrassingly outdated. A 6-year-old design that had started life already old. At number 4, Singer was a Coventry manufacturer with genuine ambitions. The SM1500, launched in 1948 and sold through much of the early 1950s, was supposed to represent the company's push into the medium family car market. It had a twin-cam engine, an impressive technical specification for a family car of that era. On paper, it sounded like something special, but the execution let it down significantly. The body was large and heavy relative to the engine's output. The twin-cam unit, while technically interesting, was not developed to its potential. Performance was not notably better than simpler, cheaper competitors. Build quality was inconsistent. The SM1500 developed a reputation for mechanical fragility that its technical sophistication could not overcome. And Singer, as a company, was struggling financially. Resources for proper development were limited. The SM1500 felt like a car that needed more time and more money than Singer could provide. By the mid-1950s, Singer had been absorbed into the Roots group. The SM1500 faded away, a car of unfulfilled promise from a company that deserved a better ending. At number 3, the Jowett Javelin is a complicated entry on this list, because in many ways, it was genuinely advanced. Launched in 1947 and sold into the early 1950s, the Javelin had a flat-4 engine, torsion bar suspension, and aerodynamic styling that was genuinely ahead of its time. Jowett, a small manufacturer from Bradford, had produced something that the major companies hadn't managed. But Jowett was too small to support the Javelin properly. The engine developed serious reliability problems. Big end bearing failures were common. The issues were known, they were reported, and Jowett struggled to resolve them with the resources available. Owners who loved the car, and many did, genuinely, found themselves dealing with breakdowns that a better resourced manufacturer would have eliminated. Jowett ceased car production in 1954. The Javelin died with the company. It is remembered with sadness more than anger, a brilliant idea that a small company could not sustain. In another world, with more money, more time, more support, the Javelin could have been something truly remarkable. Instead, it became a lesson in the gap between vision and capability.
At number 2, Bristol cars, in the early 1950s, were doing something unusual. They were building cars based heavily on pre-war BMW designs, the result of a complicated arrangement following the end of the Second World War. Bristol's engineers had studied BMW's work and used it as the foundation for their own vehicles. The Bristol 401, produced from 1948 to 1953, was an aerodynamically sophisticated car with genuine technical interest. The aluminium body was carefully shaped. The engineering was meticulous. But the 401 was slow. The 2-liter engine produced modest power. For a car positioned at the very top of the market, at a price that put it among the most expensive cars available, the performance was deeply underwhelming. Wealthy buyers who paid Bristol prices expected to be transported with some authority. The 401 transported them carefully, quietly, and without any particular urgency. For a car that drew on BMW's engineering heritage and Bristol's aeronautical precision, the gap between expectation and reality was significant. And among those who paid the very considerable asking price, disappointment was quietly widespread.
And here we are at number 1, the Austin A40 Devon. Produced by the Austin Motor Company from 1947 through to 1952, the Devon was one of the most important British cars of the early post-war period. It was sold in enormous numbers. It was exported around the world. It carried the flag of British manufacturing to markets across Europe, America, and beyond. And it was fundamentally not good enough for the job it was given. The Devon's styling was conservative to the point of timidity. While American manufacturers were producing cars with genuine post-war optimism, lower, wider, more expressive, the Devon looked like it had been designed before the war ended. Because in many ways, it had. The build quality was inconsistent. Export models in particular suffered from quality control problems that damaged Britain's reputation in markets it desperately needed. The side valve engine was already a dated design choice. The interior was austere in ways that felt less like deliberate minimalism and more like an unwillingness to invest. But the Devon's true disgrace was not mechanical. It was symbolic. This was the car that Britain chose to show the world in the years immediately following the war. At a moment when the country needed to demonstrate that British engineering was world-class, that the sacrifice of the war years had produced a nation capable of leading in peacetime. The Devon was what they sent. And it wasn't good enough. Not for the moment. Not for the ambition. Not for the price of what had been paid to reach that point in history. The Austin A40 Devon was a national disgrace not because it was the worst car ever built. It was a disgrace because of the gap between what Britain needed it to be and what it actually was. Britain deserved better. And for the buyers at home and the customers abroad who put their trust in that famous badge, so did they.
10 cars, 10 failures. 10 moments when Britain fell short of its own standards. But perhaps that is what makes the 1950s so worth examining. It was a decade of genuine rebuilding, of a nation trying to find its feet after the most devastating conflict in human history. The miracle is not that some cars were bad. The miracle is that so many were good. The same decade that produced these disappointments also produced the original Mini concept, the early Jaguar saloons, and the foundations of cars that would define British motoring for generations. The 1950s were complicated, brilliant and frustrating in equal measure, and the cars reflect that perfectly. Leave a comment below.
We read every single comment. And if you love British motoring history, subscribe to UK Car Vault. We'll keep telling the stories worth remembering.